Hello, and welcome to the topic 3 in module 4, Understanding Contemporary Issues. This topic only has one subtopic, and that is going to be the impact of technology on newspapers and magazines. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand the massive changes that took part in the 1980s. And the massive changes that occurred to the print industry particularly, but also to some extent to the broadcasting industry as well. And you'll be able to assess how these changes have been built upon in intervening years, and maybe explain some of the newer technologies, such as social media, on print journalism in particular. So, terrifying technology, is it something we should be terrified about? Well, no, it's not harmful. And if you look at what we're doing here, we're using technology actually to get in touch with each other. And you're watching me on another continent, talking to you. So it's not harmful, and it's not trying to replace traditional journalism. Some of that is happening, but technology, people didn't design technology with the purpose of destroying journalism, but it's providing many more opportunities and ways for all people to source media and to connect with their readers. Traditional journalism, of course, certainly still exists, but technology has certainly enhanced how journalism works by bringing a lot of different advantages. We're not really in an era where all journalism has been slowly transforming into digital or technological journalism, but we are getting there. We are still seeing in some places traditional newspapers being set up. We're still seeing traditional magazines launching, but we're also seeing traditional newspapers move online, magazines cease printing, but other magazines just appearing and being produced online and in digital forms. So we're seeing a big change, and it's a big mix, but it's also a very interesting mix in that it gives an awful lot more access for a lot of people. So that is the views of Feras Suryani. But you know, there's a lot to discuss in this sort of area, and there's a lot to think about. So there's a picture there from newspapers and magazines as I remember them when I started in this job. That's the way it was for centuries, practically. It was a very, very laborious, time-consuming method of printing, but that's the way it worked. And what you're seeing in that picture is the minute little bits of type that get put together to form the page of a newspaper. That's, I would guess, a tabloid newspaper by the look of it, because of the shape. But nevertheless, you can see the amount of work that goes into that. So producing a print product was extremely complex. Journalists produced the copy. They produced the reports, the features, and so on. Photographers produced images. You could not, certainly in this country, you could not mix the two. A journalist was not permitted to take a photograph. A photographer did not write stuff for the paper. So that was already time consuming in a sense, because you had two people doing a job at once. Sub-editors then designed and edited using pen and paper. It was actually quite skilled, really, because you had to be able to look at a piece of copy, work out the number of words, work out how long that was going to be in column centimeters, column inches, whichever system we used, whether it was metric or imperial. But you used pen and paper. You wrote a headline because you knew how many characters went across a line. Then we sent all those marked up copies. We marked them up to say what sort of text you wanted, whether it was bold, whether it was italic, the typeface you wanted, and so on. And that was sent to compositors, who then typed it all out again into those metal, what were known as slugs. They're just long lines of metal. And they were all arranged according to the instructions that we sent out. What happened then was that proofs came back. You had to check them carefully. You had to change any errors. If headlines didn't fit, you had to rewrite them. You had to make sure everything was in the right place, and sometimes it wasn't. and then you had to send that back. It had to be redone, making the amendments, sent back to you to check again, and that had to be finally agreed, passed off by all the different people, and then it could go and be printed. So you can see it was a highly complex and very slow process. The problem was that people thought that this was not a very good idea. So producing a print product, as you can see, was complex. Process was slow and it was costly. It was extremely costly, actually, because I remember working for a magazine which was called the Radio Times. You may have heard of it. It was part of the BBC. And we were printing, in the days when I was on it, on a weekly basis, 4.5 million copies. Well, you know, the population in the UK is nothing like as big as India. But 4.5 million copies for a country which was then about 55 million in population was an awful lot. And it was very, very costly to produce, but we spent ages actually making sure that it was perfect and all the rest of it. So it took us a whole week to produce the weekly magazine. Now, a daily newspaper is done, well, obviously within a day. But what happened was that the print operators and the owners decided that we needed direct input, which meant stories would be typed directly into the computer by reporters who would send it direct to the sub-editors who designed everything on the screen, and it passed straight off for print, which meant you abandoned that entire structure of the compositors and it went straight to the printers. And that's where there was a big, big upset. Rupert Murdoch led the charge, really, by moving his newspapers overnight from Fleet Street in London to a new base in Wapping in East London. And there you see some of the pictures of what was happening. Night after night, it was near riot because people had lost their jobs. However, these were people who were paid very, very highly, and it cost the business an awful lot of money. But since the 1980s then, electronic media has done more than anything, probably far more than all that change in the way newspapers were put together to bring about media globalization. That's because we can do things quickly. I can write a feature here, publish it to you in India, and you'll have it within seconds of my sending it out to you. Newspapers have moved online, as you know. Some of them have completely. Some of them have in India, some of them have here, for instance. And whether that's a loss, I don't know. A lot of people like the hard copy of the newspaper, but that's the way it's going. New outlets use online publishing, and as I said at the beginning, a lot have produced magazines which are and newspapers which are just online. I actually prefer to receive something online, mostly because it saves the planet, it saves trees, it saves distribution, it saves pollution in driving stuff around the country and so on. And social media contributes extensively to citizen journalism, which we've talked about before. That is people who are untrained just becoming part of the whole journalism operation, but actually producing stories and supplying them in there. It also provides interactive journalism where we can write a story and invite people to comment on it. And it, of course, provides news leads, because if you think about looking at Facebook or something like that, you'll see an idea, you'll see a lead for doing something, and then actually following that up. But we often see false, misleading, and extreme content, which is commonplace. False because people invent these conspiracy theories, misleading sometimes because people do not check facts. They don't do what journalists do and check and check and check and check to make sure that everything is correct. And there's also extreme content, which is frowned upon, is in fact illegal, certainly in the UK, but where you put in hate for people who have a different political view, different race, different community, and so on. So that's becoming commonplace on electronic media. I'm sure it's the case in India, and we did have a look at that issue where the lady accused somebody of sexual harassment on Facebook, and the poor guy lost his job and couldn't actually do anything despite the fact he was innocent and proven innocent. So the new pressures, really, that have come into place. There are areas which may need to change as social media continues its progress. For instance, publications are often developing subscription and membership models. Most editors see this as the way forward, overtaking advertising as the main revenue stream. It does mean that you pay by, let's say, direct debit or a standing order from your bank directly to the newspaper that you want to buy, and they get it every month, and that's fine. Because that means that I'm not going to cancel it if I go away. I'm not going to cancel it if I forget. I'm not going to forget to go and buy the paper or decide, oh, I don't want to get it today. I can't be bothered. The weather's horrible. I'm not going out, or something like that. So that's, again, a way forward, subscription and membership models. We see hints of possible subsidy for news production. It's something which is beginning to take traction really in the UK, in the United States, in other parts of Europe, where people who have got a lot of money, the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, and people like the BBC and Viacom and the gigantic broadcasters, providing some of their income to subsidize news production within communities. And in some ways, we're seeing that Facebook, Apple News and YouTube are losing impact because that has dropped quite a bit in recent years, but Google is still very, very highly regarded by editors. You can look into that. There's quite a lot of research into that sort of area as well. So again, that can be the change in how things are moving on. The other pressures, which we've referred to before, journalists continue to become more multi-skilled. They need to have not only writing skills, but also editing skills, audio skills, television skills, and so on. So you've got to have all of that at your fingertips. But there is that risk, again, which we've discussed a bit, of journalist burnout, where people are expected to work and work and work very, very quickly, and work across several different types of output. And again, that's not necessarily sustainable, because people will get so tired they will just collapse. We don't know really how much that artificial intelligence is going to be a critical pathway to the future. It's certainly now a big issue, and it's being researched quite a lot, and we know that it's going to take on. How do we know that in 30 years' time that newspapers or broadcasts are not going to be produced artificially, and we will be told by machines, which after all we have invented, are they going to take over from journalism? So there is therefore a threat to news. In many countries, certainly again the USA and the UK, for example, nearly half of the public relies on social media for their news coverage, which again is a bit difficult because they know from social media outlets what you're interested in. And therefore, if I'm interested in finding out what's happening in I don't know, South Africa today, because it hasn't come up on my profile for a long time, they probably won't feed that to me. So again, it's quite dangerous in that we're only being exposed to what we want, rather than being exposed to something and choosing not to read it if we don't want to. So again, there's one big change. Another one is that social media is massive communication. But the information landscape is also massive. We can communicate easily, but the information that we have is potentially huge out there. I looked up something perfectly simple the other day, which was something like finding a bus route to somewhere, and it produced 3.5 billion responses. Well, you know, all I want to do is find the time of a bus to get from one side of the town to the other. And the 3.5 billion pages, quite who's producing them, I have no idea. There's also news breaks, potentially on social media. Stuff breaks on there first. It doesn't come through the newspapers. It doesn't come through the television. It's fairly rare. My late father, for instance, if something came on the television and it came up as news flash, it was always kind of, you freeze and he'd say, hello, what's this? And it really was something desperately important. But we hardly ever see it now because it is broken on social media. And speed of response remains critical, particularly from news outlets. But the thing is, this rush to be first can often lead to mistakes. It famously did, for instance, in the 7th of July bombings in London, when Sky News didn't check and put out on its news feed that a fourth bomb had gone off on a bus in London, except it hadn't. That wasn't true. But the speed to get it out there first. How have journalists adapted? Well, journalists have become very portable, in a sense. Not that journalists are portable, but journalism is. Laptops, tablets, anywhere with a connection with Wi-Fi, whatever, on your phone, and so on. You can work anywhere. With your mobile phone means your office can be in any place at any time. The quality of them now is so good that the cameras are practically broadcast standard. In fact, a lot of broadcasters will use them. The recording services are broadcast standard, so again, very easily adaptable and usable. Nearly half of the public, again, relies on social media, so having those tablets and phones and so on with access to social media means they're in touch with the news. So although it's not necessarily the best way to get your news, at least they're getting it, which is good. But as journalists adapted, so did readership, and smartphones and tablets mean people can read news on the go, but they become very, very much more selective about what they read. Whereas we would look at a page of a newspaper and turn it over and think, well, I'm not terribly interested in that. At least you'd looked at the headlines and the pictures and so on. So you might have picked something up there. So in summary then, there have been massive changes since the 1980s. These changes have been built upon in the intervening years, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. And impact of newer technologies such as social media have been immense, particularly on print journalism. So there we are. I hope that's of interest. Do read around it if you can. There's plenty of information out there. There's one reference there, but it's certainly worth a read. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.